Hello and welcome to An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1975 slapstick comedy I Wonder Who's Killing Her Now. And in this film we meet Jordan Oliver. That's his smiling mug in the middle of the image, and he's a complacent and rather foolish man, but he had the good fortune to marry a wealthy woman, and he's been coasting by ever since with the minimum possible effort. He works for his wife's dad, where he does a pretty lousy job, frankly, and in fact, a dishonest job because he's been embezzling money from the fund. He gets caught, refer to that incompetent thing, which costs him his job, and he's also found to be on the hook for $250,000 to repay what he stole, which is, actually like the sweetheart deal for being the son-in-law, because if he hadn't been, he would have just been sent to jail. He goes to his wife, who's so far always covered for him, and asks for money, but she's finally had enough, and she wants a divorce. This leads Mr. Oliver to hatch a nefarious plan. He's going to insure his wife for $1 million, and then he's going to hire a hitman to kill her so he can claim the money. He'll pay off his debt. He'll be $750,000 to the good, less what he has to pay the hitman. But the plan runs into two major snags. The first snag is that Oliver messed up when he was establishing the insurance policy, and it's invalid, so he's not going to get anything if his wife dies. The second problem is that the hitman subcontracted the job to another guy, who subcontracted it to a third guy, who subcontracted, well, you get the idea. The bumbling Oliver must now try and prevent his wife's murder while tracking down one prospective killer after another and then dragging them around in an increasingly demented ensemble, even as multiple attempts are still being made on his wife's life. How many killers have been hired? Who's trying to kill her now? And will they succeed before Oliver can find his wife? Honestly, the answers probably don't matter over much in the end in this souffle-light bit of film, but the questions are certainly what the ride is all about. So, this film is also known under the title Kill My Wife, Please, and it's not generally very well regarded. And look, it's certainly not the comic caper it wants to be, I guess, though I actually found myself enjoying its bumbling efforts to entertain via Oliver's bumbling efforts to first murder and then save his wife. But yeah, let's talk about what went wrong with the movie and why I kind of liked it anyway. So the film begins with some very Pink Panther-esque credits. And I very much doubt that's a coincidence because it was conceived and funded on the basis that it was a vehicle for Peter Sellers, who is, still to this day best known for his portrayal of the bumbling Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther films. Unfortunately, Sellers had to pull out of the project at the last minute. Perhaps ironically, this was because the studio couldn't get insurance for him. Go figure. So instead, the role went to Bob Dishy. Now, if you have no idea who Bob Dishy is, then don't worry. Like, the highest profile roles that Wikipedia can come up with for him are that he was in 2 episodes of Columbo and 1 episode of The Golden Girls. He's a long way from being a household name and, frankly, a long way from being Peter Sellers. Now, I've seen some very scathing reviews of Dishy's performance in this film, and I think they're a bit over the top. I mean, he's not great in this by any means, but he's serviceable as the amorally incompetent Jordan Oliver, and frankly, I'm not sure Peter Sellers could have done all that much more with the role, because, frankly, the script is not the best. I do quite like some of the increasingly extreme murder attempts, which are amusingly daft, but a lot of the time, the writer on this, or the writers, seem to have worked on the assumption that anything out of the ordinary is funny. For instance, the cast includes Angelo Rossito, who was a little under 3 feet tall, less than a metre for those of us on a sensible measurement scale, and he's playing the role of a character named Little Pianist. I think you can probably guess the intended joke of that name, given what pianist can easily sound like. The thing is, other than that name, and Rossito's physical stature, the role doesn't have anything to work with. It seems like the writers just figured, a knob joke and a small person are enough to guarantee laughs. And there's a lot of that kind of laziness in the writing. So it's especially the case of the film's false assumption that people who don't fit standard gender roles are intrinsically funny. It features a drag queen and a transvestite and a character who is coded as homosexual. And again, it doesn't do anything more with them than that. They're funny because they are those things, at least in the eyes of the script. That's not the case. It's not intrinsically funny to be any of those things, and it feels, today certainly it comes across as quite offensive. I think even in the much less enlightened mid-70s, it probably came across as lazy, even if people then weren't as likely to recognise how problematic it was. So why, given my complaints, did I still somewhat enjoy this film? Well, honestly, I think it was a matter of timing. Not within the film, but when I watched it. You see, while I post these reviews more or less in the same order that I watched the films, I don't post a video about every single thing I see. Sometimes there's just nothing to talk about. She Gods of Shark Reef, for instance, has exactly one memorable feature: its title. Everything else about the film is entirely derivative and bland. So it didn't get a review, there was nothing to say. But while I Wonder Who's Killing Her Now isn't a good film, it's at least moderately interesting to talk about in the ways that it fails. I'm generally inclined to enjoy an interesting failure more than it deserves at any time, and that's particularly the case when I've just watched a number of very dull failures. Being uninteresting is, in my opinion, the absolute worst failure a work of entertainment can have, and I would much rather an interesting disaster over dull mediocrity any day. And while this film isn't truly a disaster, it's just not very good. It does at least have some elements that I can point to and say, that's something that's actually worth talking about. So that's I Wonder Who's Killing Her Now. I definitely wouldn't say I recommend it, but I don't personally regret having seen it. Next time, the 1983 martial arts odyssey Fantasy Mission Force, which is another example of the bad film, but interesting to talk about scenario. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.